You're listening to Why We Do What We Do.
Welcome to Why We Do What We Do Mini. I'm your host, Abraham.
And I'm your host, Shane.
We are a psychology podcast. We talk about the things that people do and animals do, and sometimes we talk about the mantras that we recite to ourselves that have us convinced that we can't change.
Yes. So, like, when you hear things like, I always think of "it is what it is."
Yeah.
As a mantra. And so our friends used to make fun of that because somebody would say that and we'd be like, all you're saying is what is happening is what is happening.
Yep.
So
there's a certain zen to that, you know?
Yeah. It's nice if you aren't somebody who likes change.
A lot of people that fall into that category. Anyway,
That's true.
Thank you for joining us. However you found us, if you like what you hear today, then please consider liking, subscribing, and of course, telling a friend. If you'd like to support us financially, you can join us on Patreon, patreon.com/WWDWWD podcast. You can always head over to our website, pick up some merch, and other things that would support a podcast that I haven't mentioned. But let's go ahead and dive into this because I am what I am.
I am what I am too.
Yeah.
I too am what I am.
We have a common refrain for explaining or excusing our behavior with the universally accepted rationale of because.
Yeah, so the modern version of this migrates the responsibility of our mushy head stuff, our brain. It's not wrong, but it might be a little bit misleading and is not particularly helpful, especially when we're trying to solve a problem or create solutions or maybe even change our own behavior.
Yeah, or just even create like the possibility of a different future than what is the current situation.
Right.
Inviting change, if you will.
Exactly.
So I hear people frequently comment about their behavior by excusing it with this idea that something along the lines of, quote, that's just how my brain works, end quote. And throughout time, we have likely had this way of thinking about what we do when we don't understand ourselves. So we might say, that's just who I am. Or as Popeye said, I am what I am. Or as I like to say, a yam, what a yam.
I love that.
But this idea that I am what I am seems to come from the Hebrew phrase. Oh, I looked this up and I forgot how it is. It's like, Eye asher eye, or maybe Eve asher eve. I am who I am. That's how that saying would translate, I think, more directly, which in turn comes from the Hebrew Bible in Exodus 3:14. Pi.
Hey.
When Moses asks God about his name. But the translation about the exact what that would mean is debated by people who care to debate those sorts of things.
Sure, yeah. So what is curious about the idea behind that's just how my brain works is the implication that this means that this is how your brain has always worked and will always work. But it almost certainly did not work that way before it acquired language and experience, and it will almost certainly change with language and experience as you age, with maturation and all the things that go along with that. As you develop and have more experiences, your brain will operate differently than it did. I think of like, if I had this brain when I was a teenager, I would be a very different person. I would have had a very different outcome in my life.
Yeah, I sometimes think like it would be cool to go back to being a teenager knowing what I know now, but I have not really thought through the implications of that, and it is a little scary.
We would not be fun teenagers, I don't think. Like, I think that we would be too serious for our own good. Like, we would be so risk averse. We're like, no, we don't need to do that anymore.
Yeah,
like,
very
don't do
much
that.
so. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely not fun at all.
No.
So this idea that our behavior is kind of locked in place, that's just who I am, that's just how my brain works, but also thinking that like that isn't how it worked before you've had experience and developed language and participated effectively in a culture, right? This means that our pattern of behavior cannot be an idiosyncratic necessity for the neurological structure and functioning of one's brain.
Sure.
And what I mean is that if our patterns of behavior are developed, then it is not a universally human thing to have us be like sort of locked in place. And it's not even necessarily a you thing, as it's kind of just the current state of the thing that is constantly in flux, but it's just what it's like right now. And I guess that's a long, esoteric, roundabout way of saying that if it's developed, that means that it's kind of just always in a constant state of change. And whatever it is that seems to be your fixed pattern of behavior is your behavior right now in this circumstance, not the way it has always been and will always be.
Right. So if it is a developmental thing, then a more accurate way of saying this is to add two critical words to the end of it. This is just how my brain works right now, which is kind of also totally not true, or at least is so obvious that it isn't worth saying. Like, it's like saying that is the thing that just happened in this moment, but it is at least closer to being correct because it's a little bit more objective and it's not quite as locked in as this is just how my brain works.
Yes, exactly. Very good. And unfortunately, ads are not forever. They are not fixed, but there are ads right now.
Ads are happening when they're happening.
All right, let's get back to that's just how our brain works.
So the other problem with this defeatist attitude is that it implies it cannot and should not change. So it's not helpful. Like, what do you do with that kind of statement or attitude or thought, right? There is no opportunity to learn if that is just the way things are. If that's how things are and they're fixed, then it doesn't matter what you do next. There's no developmental growth. There's no learning. And if things are stuck in an immutable place for the rest of your life, then there's really no point in trying to do new things. And if this is just how your brain works right now, just who you are right now, and this is just kind of one isolated incident, that you can kind of learn or grow or develop and gain new things. If you commit to never changing, it will be harder to change. You still will, but it'll be more difficult, or you might not at least recognize that you have changed when those things happen.
Yeah, exactly right. So sticking to how things are means finding value and reward in correspondence between how things are and how you said that they should be. Sort of saying, and what I'm saying here is like you're more or less incentivizing for yourself to keep things static, to find value in a lack of learning, in a lack of change. If you say they should be stagnant and follow this one particular pattern, then you will find value and reward in outcomes and actions that are stagnant and stick to that one particular pattern.
Right.
So it is treating this as not only is this how things work right now, but also how they're going to continue to work indefinitely. But that, again, sort of incentivizes a pattern of seeking that. Like you then only you try and keep it the same, even if you're not doing so like with a clear cognizant attention to the fact that that's what you're doing. You're setting yourself up to look for correspondence between the idealized should sort of world and the one you actually find yourself in, and are always constantly trying to push it back to the homogeneity of things are just this way.
Right. So committing to the opportunity to learn from our experiences means finding reward and value in outcomes that align with the progression along some dimension of improvement. So essentially what that means is when we have opportunities to learn, then we can improve, we can get better, we can contact new and better rewards as a result of this. It doesn't mean that we need to be perfect, but it does allow us to strive to get better, especially if we have kind of the value or the belief system that we are not stagnant creatures, our behavior is not permanent. Right. So like we always learn something new and it varies. And that is a really powerful thing. And we should be creating those opportunities. And just saying that I am who I am doesn't allow for that.
The simple fact of the matter is that we are constantly learning and developing from cradle to grave. This is a lifetime experience that we are going to find ourselves in. We can try and pretend like things aren't going to change, but they are going to, because we have impermanent lives.
Right.
They do not last forever, right? The particular reason we do any one thing at a given moment is part of a very rich, interwoven tapestry of variables and experiences that we've had and the present circumstances under which we find ourselves. All of that stuff creates the ongoing context of right now and sets the path for the future. So we're sort of just fooling ourselves, pretending that we can keep things the way that they are when they never will be. They're just always in an ongoing interaction with all the other things around us.
Right. So when you're not sure, it is actually more productive to ask questions like, why did I just do that? And then reflect on it. It's a more productive take because you start analyzing the conditions and the circumstances by which you did this thing. Or even better, what can I learn from this? And then do better next time because you can analyze what you've done, what the outcomes were, and then make a different choice or different decision in that circumstance again.
So all of this is talking about this idea of people saying things like, that's just the way my brain works. That could be around anything, really. Like, I can't do math. That's just the way my brain works. Or in this case, maybe doesn't work. Or like, I don't like action movies. That's just the way my brain works, whatever it is. And that's, again, like, this doesn't say anything useful, and it certainly seems to commit to stagnation. But there is a really important caveat to bring in here, which is that there are diagnoses that people have that reflect a genuine pattern that can more or less be expected for those people.
Right.
And further, there are certain patterns and preferences that are very consistent for people throughout their whole lives. The research on this actually shows that once your personality starts to develop, the longer it goes on the path that it is on, the more it will sort of lock into place that is your personality.
Right.
That's a fairly consistent thing that happens.
Right.
We've talked about personality. I think people treat it as being prescriptive when it's not, but that's a conversation for a different time. But just to state that, like, there are things that become more and more fixed ways of being over time unless circumstances put that on a different path. So adding to that, people who are gay or trans have remarkably consistent thoughts, feelings, and behaviors on this from an early age, early in childhood and throughout their lives. And I mean, obviously it would make sense to say people who are not, who would identify as cisgender and straight also have consistent thoughts and feelings about this their entire lives.
Right.
That's just a thing. And so we're not at all saying that, like, that's not actually how their brains work. Like, it is a pretty fixed pattern. And like, I think it's a different type of aspect. And again, let's think of like diagnoses. Of like a diagnosis for, like, let's say like Down syndrome. That's like that is going to be like a part of who they are their entire lives, right?
Right.
But I think there are people who, again, like when they're talking about things like their preferences or their relative skills, and they're saying that's just the way my brain works, and that's really what we're talking about with this conversation.
Right. Absolutely. So the moral of the story is, don't commit to stagnation for the sake of stagnation. No one wins. You certainly don't win. You miss out on growth opportunities. You miss out on opportunities to really do better. So really don't commit to this. Commit to learning and growth and development and making sure that your flower outgrows its pot.
Love that. That's very cute.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I could certainly pontificate further, but we are about at the time that we have set for ourselves. So I think that was a really lovely note to end on. If you'd like to support us, join us on Patreon, tell a friend, like, subscribe, do all the things. If you'd like to tell us about how your brain works, you can email us at info@wwdpodcast.com. You can also reach us on the social media platforms. Thank you so much to my team. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you to our Patreon supporters. Is there anything that I missed, Shane, or anything you would like to add before we wrap up?
Not today, no.
All right, go out, go forth, and change your behavior.
Yay!
This is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
Bye.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.podcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.
What do you do with that?